Daniel Jones. I'm currently the outreach and engagement specialist for the Michigan Collaborative to End Mass Incarceration. I'm a consultant with American Friends Service Committee's Michigan Criminal Justice Program, chairperson for Voting Access for All Coalition, board member for Nation Outside, formerly incarcerated. I served 23 years on a life without parole sentence from the age of 16 to 39. Was released in 2019 on parole, made it off parole March 12th of this year. Glad to be home, enjoying my freedom, and honored and blessed to be involved in this work.
We put a lot of money into prisons, spending $2.2 billion a year just for 29 prisons with 35,000 people that live there.
I had the pleasure and the opportunity to meet Natalie Holbrook in 2013 while I was incarcerated at the Ken Ross Correctional Facility. She came up to the facility and introduced the idea to a small group of us that we should create a peer-to-peer curriculum-based program where we would help one another just navigate through the parole process, commutation process.
We do advocacy for people in prison here in Michigan around all sorts of issues related to conditions of confinement, access to release, and we're an anti-prison organization. So we think that we can deal with harms in communities in better ways than we do, and not punishment-based ways. The American Friends Service Committee has worked diligently against the failed experiment of the penitentiary.
That program, through the leadership of Natalie Holbrook and American Friends Service Committee, is a huge part of why I'm standing right here today.
My name's Ray Lanier. I'm the Wayne County Director for Michigan Liberation. And Michigan Liberation is a grassroots power building organization that centers folks directly impacted by the criminal legal system. And our goal is to transform that system into something that produces real accountability, real safety, real transformative communities.
My name is Booker T. Walker. I am a clean slate organizer with Michigan Liberation. We advocate for the community. We're the voice of the voiceless.
Upon my release, I was able to meet the brother Booker Walker. When I first came home, Michigan Liberation was engaging the community and had community events where people could come out and share their concerns about reforms to the current justice system.
My name is Dr. Rita Shah. I am an associate professor of criminology at Eastern Michigan University. My research areas are mostly in probation and parole, focusing on what the systems do, how the communities in which the buildings are located impact those who are under supervision, but also then sort of questioning what we mean when we say by rehabilitation.
When people say gerrymandering, they mean the way that a voting district has been drawn, the way those boundaries have been drawn to an advantage.
Every 10 years, the census does a count of populations within a state, and then we redraw the districts to figure out congressional, Senate, House, and then also state districts as well. Gerrymandering is how we draw those districts in a way that skew towards one goal or another.
When you have gerrymandering, that's traditionally thought of as politicians that are picking their constituents rather than allowing the drawing of districts where people can vote for the representatives and pick a representative of their choice. My name is Alex Kaistura, and I'm the legal director of the Prison Policy Initiative. Broadly, we focus on ending mass criminalization and mass incarceration in the U.S.
I am also a returning citizen. I've been home 10 years. When I was incarcerated, they held census and they counted us. And that particular time, I was not aware of what exactly gerrymandering was and what it was doing.
Typically, it skews in a way that supports one party, so that even if a Democrat runs in one district and because of the way that it's drawn, the Republicans are always going to win, or vice versa. So the way it might be drawn could be that the Republican might have a lot of support, but because of the way the district is drawn, the Democrat will always win no matter what.
Oftentimes, it can advantage either party, which is why they say, when Democrats are in power, they're going to draw lines that are going to benefit that party. The same is for any party that's in power. Prison-based gerrymandering is when you're packing a voting district with incarcerated individuals.
They come into prisons and they take the census and count those people in the district and the community that they are incarcerated in, opposed to the ones that they were residing in prior to that.
So when we talk about prison-based gerrymandering, what we're talking about is how folks who are in prison get counted as part of the census and then get drawn within their district.
Prison gerrymandering takes gerrymandering one step further. So in gerrymandering, you kind of choose where to draw the lines, but prison gerrymandering gets at the underlying data.
So typically when you're counted in your census count, you're counted in the place of your residence. For most of us, that's our apartment, our condo, our home, wherever we happen to live most of the time. Because of the way that the census defines your typical residence, folks in prison get counted as living in the prison instead of either their residence before they're incarcerated, or perhaps where their children live, or where their partners live, or where their other family lives.
Some residence criteria, and this is the way we've basically done it since 1790, is we count people where they live and sleep most of the time. So when it comes to like quarters populations, such as like college dormitories, prisons, long-term care facilities, like mental institutions, things like that, we count people there at the location.
So you have people that are moved from their home, they're counted at the location of the correctional facilities as if they resided there. So you can actually change the underlying data, inflating any existing gerrymanders.
And so what ends up happening is you end up with a skewed district where you have a prison with maybe 1,000 people in one facility that don't typically live in that area, and they get counted in that district instead of the district where they actually come from.
And when you have mechanisms like prison gerrymandering, people see loopholes that they can exploit, and this is one such thing.
So actually what people do is that they count you in, but you're counted out at the same time.
So when you look at the way prison gerrymandering works, is you see groups of prisons being lumped into certain districts, and anybody who lives outside those districts, and really anybody who lives outside of the single district that has the incarcerated population that's being used to pad it out, everybody loses representation to that single district that is able to claim the most kind of ghost constituents.
My name is Sylvia Santana. I am the state senator for the 3rd District in Michigan, which encompasses Detroit, Dearborn, and Melvindale. When you think about representation in the state, accounting for individuals at the prisons, those districts have 4 to 5% more population based off the prison population that we're accounting for. So if you were to shift that number in those individuals based off their actual residency, where they're going to return to, where they reside if they were not in prison, it makes a significant difference when it comes to a shift of how they're represented here in the state.
I'm Sarah Anthony, and I serve as state representative for the 68th House District, which includes the city of Lansing and Lansing Township. I'm the first African-American woman to serve in this capacity, and just a proud Lansing resident. Born and raised, absolutely love my job.
Every 10 years when we've had the opportunity to redraw the maps, this has come up, I'm sure. Noticing that we have a county where 50% of the population is incarcerated, like that has come up. And the state legislature has chosen time and time again to continue to absorb that.
Because you've now shifted the folks who would count in their communities to a community that they don't actually live in, that they aren't actually a community member of, you've now skewed it so that the district where the prison is located has a stronger vote.
So when you think about that, you have this large population of individuals who are being counted for resources, but are not able to enjoy those resources and are not able to lift up their voices and be represented. That just doesn't seem right.
What you often see happening is funds and resources that would go to the communities where the folks in prison would be counted in if they weren't in prison, now is getting put into the communities where they're housed because the prison is located there.
I personally can speak in behalf of a lot of those who unfortunately aren't able to speak for themselves. Me actually going into the prison system in 1985 for taking a purse out of an elderly white lady's car, and I received 25 to 100, okay? As a result, I stayed in prison 13 years doing that tenure. And when I returned home, resources were not available for me.
So when you shift representation away from communities that are the hardest hit by incarceration and give that extra representation to communities that contain prisons, you're shifting the landscape of representation, you're shifting the political priorities in who gets funding and how much and what kind of funding is prioritized by the legislature.
We've already disenfranchised folks who are in prison because they can't vote while in prison. Now we're double disenfranchising them because they're counted as a voter when they A, can't vote in the first place, and B, can't vote in that community that they're being counted in. Whereas if they could vote, they would probably list the house that they came from and vote in that community instead.
And that's just a practice that, you know, it eats away at democracy and just a fair and meaningful opportunity for communities to receive the aid and assistance that they really need.
Folks in prison aren't really members of that community. They're not really members of any community because they're not counted in the community that they actually belong to.
Incarcerated individuals are not only missing from their communities, but in essence, they are also advantaging other communities. And so when there are resources that are being counted on behalf of those individuals, you know, they come from areas in which those resources could be helping their neighborhoods, their communities, their families, right?
Mom's been in this house for 40 some years. My youngest brother lives here with her though, so we'll take our shoes off when we get up here. Yep, that's me. My mama holding me. I gotta get a copy of that one. That's going back there. That's 1956 there. Might be 57. I might have been a year old on that one. Having been a person who has 4 failed paroles, 17 felonies, and serving 25 and a half years, I came home 4 times. And when I was coming home to nothing in my community. Where are the mental health facilities? You know, we could have something for addicts, drug addicts. Where is a facility? We got land, who owns it? But the communities that I was counted in, they weren't welcoming me to their communities, which benefited as a result for counting me during their census process. And so what it did, it dissected areas of need that could have been supported in the areas when I was coming home those 4 times, and taking those resources away and providing more resources as well as representation in other districts that didn't have anything to do with me. And so you had these communities that were basically benefiting off of me being a captive in the system.
One thing that's interesting about Michigan is that the state already acknowledges that prison gerrymandering is a problem. They have statutes in place that require cities and counties to address prison gerrymandering for their local redistricting efforts. So when you're drawing a city council district, you're not allowed to use that state prison, claiming that the folks who are incarcerated there are residents of that city for drawing the local city councils.
And when you look at the election laws that we have, 8.11, Section 2, it talks about not accounting for individuals who are in a prison as population that is temporary, just like any other thing, like if you're in college or what have you.
An end to prison gerrymandering at the state level would basically just apply that same acknowledgement that prison gerrymandering should be avoided to the state legislative districts.
The law doesn't allow for us to use the prisoner population in our census tract numbers, because then our commissioner districts would be out of proportion. So we always back the prisoner count number out of our total population number.
Now, the facts around incarceration don't actually match what the residence rules are for other folks. For example, you have boarding school students who are counted at home, even though they live and sleep most of the time at the location of the boarding school. Now, you take somebody who's incarcerated for a few months, that's essentially a very similar residence circumstance, but they're still counted at the location of the facility, even though they're not incarcerated for very long, or if you are incarcerated, you're moved between facilities. So there's no reason to be counted at the location of the facility you're in on census day anyway.
People don't even look at it like that. It's not like you're a permanent resident at an institution. I've seen people arrive at an institution the same day and then get transferred the same day.
The way that the statutes were written for the cities and counties to address prison gerrymandering actually left a loophole as well. So they state that anybody in a state facility shouldn't be counted. But there's now a federal facility in Michigan. So that county that contains the federal facility is impacted, which really just goes to show that this should be fixed at the federal level rather than trying to have every state struggle with this at every level of government. So what the Census Bureau is doing is, with the redistricting data, it's actually publishing a separate table where it lists where it actually counted all the incarcerated people.
For 2020 census, we actually have a data tool for them to move their group quarters population to wherever they would like, as long as it's within the state. Say a prison was in city A and the prisoner is actually from city B, they can move that person back to city B, so they would be counted in city B's redistricting rather than city A, where the prison is located.
Michigan and
people are very close to having their citizenship back, right? But then they're being counted to create an entire legislative district. And that's problematic. In the case of a district like District 70, you have a district that wouldn't meet population requirements, but for the prison population. And you can see this in the way that the Michigan state house districts, for example, were drawn last decade. Every state house district in Michigan needs roughly 90,000 people in it. And you're allowed to deviate from that a little bit here and there. But District 70 is already low on population, and they counted about 6,000 incarcerated people in that district. So even padding out District 70 with over 6,000 incarcerated people, they still are 3,000 people short of that total district population that would be ideal for that district to have. This basically makes underpopulated districts legal on paper.
Calling the office of Representative Petto.
I've had a close relationship with Pat Altman. The population has stayed basically the same since in the 40s.
We're on the order of 7,400 with the incarcerated population. We believe that's closer to 4,529 or 30. As far as major employers in St. Louis at this time, the Department of Corrections, Michigan Department of Corrections certainly is among the top. The Department of Corrections has offered a lot of career jobs for people for the time that they've been here, and which I think dates back to the late 1980s or around 1990, since there's been the first prison here. It's a correctional facility at St. Louis. There are 2 now. At once were 3 facilities, but 2 of them combined to make what is now called the Central Michigan Correctional Facility, and then the northern facility is St. Louis Correctional Facility.
There were a lot of lost job opportunities at that time, so there was a big need for employment. The people that were for the prison thought more for the economic improvements and the money that would benefit the city. I feel that it changed the city for the better. They've proven to be a good asset for our community. We sell them electricity, we sell them water and sewer. It's worked out well for us.
Well, this idea of the constituents being incarcerated and those making up the numbers for congressional districts has not been something that I've thought of too much in the past. And of course, the census count is constitutionally mandated, and it is supposed to be where they're currently living. So about the only thought that I had initially is that our elected officials are there to represent the constituents, whether or not, in the case of prisoners, they can vote or not. So certainly there's some merit to the argument that it's not really representative of where these folks come from in a lot of cases.
Having the district set up the way it is beneficial. I like it.
Huh? Okay, all right. Okay, you guys. Love you. Love you too. All right. I'm just right here, Okay. This is when we went, this is I think the second time that they actually seen him. And so he picks them up every single time because Richard is huge, he's a big guy. And so he picks them up every single time like they little bitty kids, and they just love that. Every time I talk to Richard, he does tell me that, it's generations that have worked in the prison community, that they lived in that area. They're living in that rural community. And so it's not that many people.
It helps these communities who really survive off these prisons. It helps their families, especially with us being counted within their census, whether we are here or benefit from it at all. Not saying like they don't deserve funding and stuff, but where we come from is the reason why people start turning to drugs and crime, because they don't have the rec centers and the community centers, housing development projects, because we weren't counted in those censuses.
That county is small. You don't want to rip the jobs away, but what other concerns could that county with such a small population have as far as Wayne County, which is a huge population that you can just see that they need more representation. Legislators, they're looking out for their district, right? They want to keep these jobs. These things are intentional.
They would be less inclined to release us or shut these prisons down or do any type of criminal justice reform, because it's their families and friends that will lose.
We can have good paying jobs, but it doesn't have to come through a prison. It doesn't have to come through a jail. And it's my belief that a lot of these communities weren't given the choice. They were given a choice of starve, and not be able to take care of your family, or take this job in corrections.
This was houses. This whole block. Every block had houses.
What happens is that with gerrymandering, you're taking people who are being incarcerated, many times often because of mental health, because of substance abuse, or because of being poor, because of being black. You understand?
Unfortunately, our criminal justice system is skewed in such a way that Black and brown folks are disproportionately represented in prisons and jails.
And then you look at the numbers and you're like, well, it's all these Black people that are doing all these crimes. Or let me rephrase, it's all of these Black people who are locked up, like clearly they're criminals. When no one but grassroots organizers and movement lawyers are doing the work to say that these people are being mined from our community. When you look at my county where I live at, which is Wayne, seat of Detroit, folks from my county make up over 40% of the population in the Michigan Department of Corrections. There's a reason for that, right? People are targeted here, they're over-policed, they're under-resourced in their communities. It has a much larger impact on just the person who's being incarcerated because now this family is, further put at risk of incarceration, of having to seek other means of survival, of not having their voice taken seriously when they do go and advocate for themselves at the state seat. So recently, in June, community took to the streets on a main thoroughfare called 8 Mile for the second time to protest what folks are calling the 8 Mile Divide. Most people may know 8 Mile from Eminem's movie. It is a real place, but the history of 8 Mile is, much darker than what was shown in that movie. It is a main through line through Metro Detroit, the 3 counties that make up Metro Detroit. So that's Oakland County, Wayne, and Macomb. And each county has different makeup. So Wayne County, where Detroit is very Black, very brown, seen as very poor. You have Oakland County, which is very white, very affluent, one of the most affluent counties in the nation. And then you have Macomb County, which is also very white, but it has some rural elements to that area. The spot where all these 3 counties converge is at a spot called 8 Mile and DeQuinder. And if you look at it, it's all smashed together. Everything looks like the exact same, but there's these 3 counties. 8 Mile is notorious for picking people off regularly who are Black, who are brown, and putting them in this pipeline into the carceral system. It's part of the pipeline that's moving Black bodies from Wayne County into northern, more rural communities that depend on prison economies.
Let the people do the people's business, and that's going to work and trying to take care of yourself and getting to your job the best way you can. 8 Mile is the divider of the city, but that don't mean you have to divide the people based on their financial background. So let's put a stop to it. What do you want? Justice. When do you want it? What do you want? Where you gonna get it?
When people are incarcerated from this part of the state, when they're Black and brown, they're being shipped up north, some as far as the UP. And Michigan is a really big state. So you have people that are coming from my region, Wayne County, and they're being shipped to northern rural places.
You'll see, if you look even at the patterns of the prison closures, the Detroit prisons, they don't exist anymore. But you have Baraga and Chippewa and Kinross and Marquette, and then Carson City. God, it's a huge complex. They merged a bunch of prisons. It's huge. That's messy.
So you have northern, more rural areas in Michigan, like Ionia, like Carson City, like Baraga Village, where their population, like 50% of it is incarcerated, right?
Baraga is a very problematic prison. It's got a huge population of Black men. It's a level 5. It's got, I think, 400 administrative segregation or solitary confinement beds. Up to 80% of those beds are filled with Black bodies at any given time. It's all white staff.
I was in Baraga, Michigan, when they opened up a prison up there. I was one of the first candidates when they opened up the place. One of the first ones in the cell there, not far from Milwaukee. And the town really, from what all the officers and some of them were speaking in behalf, this is like 1994, they were not an industrial town at all, basically. The prisons gave them jobs, and a lot of the people took advantage of that. We were counted in their areas. Many of these towns hardly even had a Burger King or a McDonald's. And after years of having facilities up there, then there started to be a movement where different businesses were moving in. It become more industrious. As a result, the prisons and everything complemented these areas with a lot of economic growth. And so, whereas the communities that were not counted, which where I had come from, Detroit, they were taken away.
You have people who might be interested in corrections up in the UP and sitting on a corrections appropriations subcommittee only to keep jobs up in the UP. Not anything around, like, where are these people from?
And they're getting state representation based off of these inflated numbers. You know, these inflated numbers say on paper, these rural areas, people with only a 40% voting population, have more power, more say, more ability to act in their values than folks in Wayne County, you know, than folks in surrounding counties, Genesee County, where Flint is, you know, these Black and brown urban places.
Why in the world is it okay to take a person from Detroit and pull them 12 or 13 hours away from their house and their people and incarcerate them so that your white community member can have a job and, like, basically making a livelihood off the backs of Black bodies? It's directly connected to the history of slavery and genocide and the historical repression of Black folks and the Black vote.
People that were in Baraga wasn't going through the restrictions that people were going through in the inner cities. You have parts of the city, as a matter of fact, from 1967, from the riots that still haven't been, that are still in ruins. And so this is part of the system. This is what it does to a community. It deteriorates a community.
And when we talk about prison gerrymandering, and we talk about the idea of prison and, you know, how this is supposed to be safe and, you know, how this is supposed to be for our better representation, none of these things, the incarceration, the way that we draw our voting maps, speak to any of the transformative solutions that could come up to help support that family when a loved one is taken.
What the system's done to me. What the system's done to me. They lock us up, they shoot us down. They lock us up, they shoot us down. But we'll get justice in this town. But we'll get justice in this town. Say we'll get justice in this town. But we'll get justice in this town. Say we'll get justice in this town. Say we'll get justice in this town. We'll get justice in this town.
Pep, Penelope, come on in. You got socks on, you see they shoes.
I've been on prison yards, actually, that was smaller than this, in my backyard. You can imagine that. And so for me to be here is just a blessing every day, my own, something I can call my own.
This was definitely not what I saw myself doing when I came home. And you know, it's a blessing just for me to be able to share my lived experiences in a way that, like, helps others draft legislation and create models for services for directly impacted communities and people when they come home from prison. So it's like, you know, it's kind of surreal. Representative Sarah Anthony introduced House Bill 4276, which seeks to end prison gerrymandering in the state of Michigan by counting people that are incarcerated at their pre-incarceration addresses. And there was also a Senate bill introduced by Senator Sylvia Santana, that's Senate Bill 151, which seeks to do the same thing. It's plain language, clear cut.
The representation that we currently have should be one vote, one person. And here in the state of Michigan, that is not the case. We actually are accounting for that population of individuals in the prisons, which are mostly located in rural areas. And so when you look at how those people are being accounted for, when they go back to their local communities, they don't have the representation that is equivalent to their actual districts because they're being accounted for as a population, a part of where the prison resides.
This legislation would ultimately ensure that incarcerated individuals, you know, men and women who are in our facilities, just would not be used as a springboard to further anyone's political agenda. That's really what these bills are designed to do.
The impact that it would have is that when you think about how we look at our prior census that in 2010, we have several districts in the Senate seats as well as the House seats who have maybe a 4 to 7% increase of their population based off of the prison population.
This would be huge, right? It's not the silver bullet, it's not like the full solution, but it does continue to entertain the dialogue of prison gerrymandering and start to repair some of this historical harm.
So there have been national conversations about prison gerrymandering, and there is a story to tell here in Michigan.
It's a conversation that is changing and has been changing since the 2018 ballot initiative.
In 2018, the majority of our state cast a vote for fairer representation to make sure that their districts were more accurately reflective of the makeup of communities, right?
Folks went out into the community and said, this thing is happening, we need to draw maps. There's no reason why I and my neighbor next door live in two completely different districts. That's not right.
Because this is a 10-year process. The only way that the citizens that are currently incarcerated in prison will be counted and represented where they actually live will be if the commission decides to go through the process of reapportionment, and the infrastructure is already there with other states having done this. What I am looking for on behalf of those that have no voice and cannot even vote is that you all make the decision to count them where they actually live. And that data is available. I don't have a map currently. Is that, my time is over? Good day.
Thank you so much for taking the time to address the commission. Please go to the public comment tool and finish the rest of your sentence there. We genuinely want to know what you have to say. Thank you. 2.
We have these regular folks in this independent commission drawing maps who are not well versed if they've even been exposed to this dynamic. So, you know, I ask myself, how can we truly have fair maps drawn if all of the bad things that we've been trying to avoid are not on everyone's radar. Why were these maps drawn this way? Who have these maps, historically advantaged or disadvantaged? These are things that are going to require a lot of grassroots oversight.
And I just want to thank everyone that came out here tonight to be a part of this. God bless you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Palliser. 29. And you all feel free to use both mics if you don't want to wait for this one or the other one to be clean.
Okay. My name is Dr. Constance Simon. During the last census, there were over 50,000 people incarcerated at that time. And at that time, the inmates were not getting representation where their families needed it, where their schools needed it, where they would return home and there would be a change. It gave numbers and it gave people agency in other areas because they were counted in these prisons where there were 2,000 and 4,000 people in these smaller cities. So thank you for listening to me, and I certainly hope you will take that into consideration because that shouldn't happen.
Thank you so much for taking the time to address the commission.
I didn't say thank you for coming, but I'm glad they came. But I said thank you for listening and understanding. They need to gain an understanding of what is needed and not just overlook it.
So it's not me ragging on the commission. It takes two to tango sort of thing where, the commission has this very important job and community and grassroots has an equally important job of communicating and saying, hey, as you're drawing these maps, I need you to consider these dynamics.
In the year 2000, I was incarcerated at the Michigan Reformatory in Ionia, Michigan. And I'm originally from Detroit. And while I was there, an officer passed out a census form to everybody on the cell block. As I began to fill out the form, I heard someone yell out from inside their cell, "Don't fill that out. They're trying to count us as residents here in Ionia to receive benefits and opportunities and privileges." When I heard that, I tore the census form up and threw it in the toilet. That's prison gerrymandering. A few of the people, organizations that was there, they came up and really thanked me for sharing that and speaking to that issue. And I was also approached by one of the commissioners. He came up to me and informed me that being the 14th public hearing that the commission had hosted, they've heard about prison gerrymandering at each public hearing. Out of all of the public comments that were made, he hadn't heard anyone give a personal account of being incarcerated and being counted. So he thanked me for sharing that story, just assured me that he was gonna do what he could to encourage the rest of the commission to do what was in their authority to put an end to prison gerrymandering. That is a practice in which conflates population counts and distorts this entire redistricting process. It is the responsibility of this commission to ensure that fair and equal maps are drawn. But that's impossible for you to do when you do not have an accurate count of populations of people where they will be returning to once they leave prison and where they originally come from.
I do believe that with the Independent Redistricting Commission and with a lot of love and rigor from grassroots communities and community stakeholders, that we will be able to tamp down on this horrific practice and actually get representation that represents the full humanity, not just of the state of Michigan, but of the Black and brown residents that live here too.
I encourage this commission to do what is in your authority to create these fair maps by counting people currently incarcerated at their pre-incarceration address, and do what you can to put an end to prison gerrymandering, which eats away at democracy and the fair and equal practice at people having representation in the communities in which they are counted in. Thank you. So bringing this conversation to light, you know, some people, they're not aware of prison gerrymandering and how it impacts them. So like to have their attention and to be able to educate them on how it does impact them and what steps could be taken to ensure that this practice, you know, comes to an end. Like it's fulfilling, you know, it's fulfilling for me to be able to have these conversations.
But it's going to take a lot of love and rigor and intentionality to make sure that we aren't just drawing the same maps, you know, with an independent commission. Yeah. Folks are starting to really understand that their agency as an individual doesn't just come from like where you went to school from, you know, what your family background was like, but how you use that agency and how you use that power at the ballot box.
And we going into every jail and we go fight and we go win.
Still fighting for the right to vote, what?
Amanda! I wage you! That means power to the people.
Peace and love. My name is Nicholas DeFell Buckingham. I am the campaign director for Michigan Liberation. Myself, formerly incarcerated. No big secret. There's a lot of us that is out here, right? Not just out here in this crowd, but there's a lot of us that are out here in the communities that have been impacted right here on 8 Mile, right?
People know that while it affects Black and brown folks disproportionately, that there's a whole bunch of white folks and non-Black and brown folks who are being affected by this very spot as well. But folks started talking. Folks in Oakland County started talking to folks in Wayne County. Like, is this happening to y'all on 8 Mile? And folks in Wayne County were like, yeah, this is happening to us on 8 Mile. And Macomb County folks were like, hey, don't leave us out of the conversation. This is happening to us too. And people started talking and asking, you know, well, do we feel safer when they do this? You know what I mean? Like, are people being held accountable? And like, the answer was no to both of those. What the June action was a representation of folks from all 3 counties coming together saying that like, this needs to stop. This is not representative of community values. We are tired of people being mined from our community and put in these jails in places where no one looks like them, where they have no human ties. And this isn't a one-off thing. You can't just say, well, Wayne County, you know, you're being a brat and nobody else stands with you, because we have Oakland County, who's a power holder. We have Macomb County, who's also a power holder, saying we don't agree with this too.
True justice.